What if I told you that the person everyone mocked, the girl forced to marry a beggar as punishment, would return exactly 1 year later in a private jet worth millions? What if the man sleeping on the streets was actually testing humanity itself? This is the true story of Margaret, a 19-year-old orphan whose inheritance was stolen. They married her to the town beggar as the ultimate humiliation. But what they didn't know was that her beggar husband was hiding the biggest secret this town had ever seen, a secret that would expose every lie, punish every cruelty, and prove that sometimes karma doesn't just knock on your door. Before we begin, comment below what country you're watching from. This story will restore your faith in justice. She buried her father on a rainy Tuesday. By Friday, a man she'd never met was sitting in her father's chair, holding documents that would steal her entire life. Margaret's world had collapsed twice in 11 months. First, her mother, taken by a sudden illness that gave them no time to say goodbye. Then her father, a strong man who seemed to age a decade overnight, his heart breaking under the weight of grief. He followed his wife to the grave just 10 months later. At 19 years old, Margaret was an orphan. The funeral was small, respectful. Her father had been a successful businessman, the kind of man who built his empire from nothing and owned a sprawling mansion that stood as a monument to his hard work. Margaret thought she'd have time to grieve, time to figure out her next steps, time to honor her parents' memory. She was wrong. 3 days after the burial, a black sedan pulled up to the mansion. Out stepped a man Margaret had only seen twice in her life, her father's younger brother, Uncle Raymond. He was dressed in an expensive suit, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, a leather briefcase clutched in his hand. He didn't knock. He walked straight in like he owned the place. "Margaret," he said, his voice cold and businesslike, "we need to talk." He spread documents across the dining table, papers with stamps, signatures, legal jargon Margaret couldn't fully understand. Her hands trembled as she tried to read them. "Your father and I had an agreement," Raymond said smoothly. "He signed over his assets to me years ago. This house, the business, the bank accounts, everything." Margaret's heart stopped. That's not possible. He never mentioned." "Are you calling me a liar?" Raymond's eyes were ice. She looked at the signatures. They looked like her father's handwriting, but something felt wrong, terribly, horribly wrong. Raymond smiled, a cruel, satisfied smile. "Pack your things. You'll stay in the servants' quarters from now on. This house, it's mine." Margaret stood frozen as movers began bringing in Raymond's family, his wife, his 2 spoiled children, into her home. Her father's chair, her mother's kitchen, her childhood bedroom, all stolen in a single afternoon. But what Margaret didn't know was that this was only the beginning of her nightmare and the start of a plan that would change everything. Comment below what country you're watching from. Can Margaret survive what's coming next? The transformation happened overnight. Raymond moved through the mansion like a conquering king, rearranging furniture, replacing family photos with portraits of his own children. Wife Diane, a woman with cold eyes and a sharp tongue, inspected every room with disdain. "This wallpaper is hideous," she announced. "We'll have it redone." Margaret watched from the shadows as her family home was erased piece by piece. The servants' quarters became her prison, a cramped space behind the kitchen with a single narrow window. Raymond didn't ask, he commanded. "You'll earn your keep," he said flatly. "Cook, clean, do whatever Diane requires. Consider it payment for letting you stay." Margaret wanted to scream, to fight, to show him the injustice. But she had no money, no lawyer, no family to turn to. She was utterly alone. The cruelty started small, then grew. Raymond's children, 16-year-old Vanessa and 14-year-old Kyle, treated Margaret like she was invisible, Worse, actually, like she was dirt beneath their designer shoes. Vanessa would spill juice deliberately on freshly mopped floors. "Oops," she'd say with a smirk, "clean it up." Kyle threw his muddy sports gear on Margaret's bed. "Wash these by morning." Diane was even worse. She'd inspect Margaret's work with white gloves, searching for dust that didn't exist, inventing reasons to deny her food. "You burned the eggs," Diane would lie, scraping a perfectly cooked breakfast into the trash. "No dinner for you tonight." Meanwhile, Raymond's family lived like royalty. Expensive clothes, lavish meals, weekly shopping trips that cost more than most people earned in months. They were spending her father's money, living in her father's house, erasing her father's legacy. In Margaret, she scrubbed their toilets. But here's what Raymond didn't know. Every Sunday, when the family went to their country club, Margaret snuck out. Not to escape, not to complain. She went to the children's shelter downtown, the one her mother used to volunteer at, and she brought food, told stories, gave hope to kids who had even less than she did. "Why do you still smile?" a little girl asked her. "Don't you have your own problems?" Margaret knelt down, her eyes warm despite everything. "Because kindness doesn't cost anything, and sometimes it's all we have left." What Margaret didn't realize was that someone was watching her. There was a man who sat outside the mansion gates every single day, filthy, silent, invisible to everyone. Everyone except Margaret. His name, if he even had one, was unknown to the neighborhood. People called him the beggar. He wore tattered clothes that hung off his thin frame, his face hidden beneath a worn cap and weeks of unkempt beard. He never spoke, never begged aggressively. He just existed. Most people crossed the street to avoid him. Raymond had tried to have him removed multiple times. "He's bad for property values," he'd complained to anyone who'd listen. But the man always returned, sitting quietly by the gate with a small cup and patient eyes. Margaret noticed him during one of her early morning errands, hauling garbage bags to the curb while the family still slept in silk sheets. He was watching her, not with judgment, not with pity, just watching. Something about his gaze unsettled her. It was too aware, too intelligent for someone society had written off as nothing. Weeks passed. The beggar became part of Margaret's routine. Every morning she'd see him. Every evening when she returned from the shelter, he'd still be there. One day, driven by the same compassion that took her to help orphans, Margaret did something that would seal her fate. She brought him food. Not scraps, not leftovers thrown away by Diane. She saved a portion of her own meager breakfast, bread, fruit, water, and quietly placed it beside him. He looked up, surprised. Their eyes met. "Thank you," he said. His voice was rough from disuse, but there was something underneath it. Education, dignity. Margaret smiled, the first genuine smile she'd worn in months. Everyone deserves kindness. She didn't see Vanessa watching from an upstairs window, phone in hand, recording everything with a malicious grin. By dinner, the entire household was in an uproar. "You fed him?" Diane shrieked, her face twisted with disgust. That creature?" Raymond's face darkened. "That's our food, food I pay for." "It was my portion," Margaret said quietly. "Your portion?" Raymond laughed, a cruel, bitter sound. "You don't have portions. You have what we allow you to have." But Raymond's anger wasn't just about food. An idea was forming in his mind, a twisted, brilliant idea that would solve multiple problems at once. He needed Margaret gone. She was a reminder of his brother, a potential threat if she ever challenged the documents. But throwing her out would look suspicious. Marriage, though, that was respectable, final.
and he knew exactly who the groom would be. Raymond smiled, the kind of smile that made Margaret's blood run cold. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, savoring each word. "You're 19, old enough to be married, and since you seem so fond of that beggar—" Margaret's heart stopped. "No," she whispered. "Oh, yes," Raymond replied, his eyes gleaming with cruelty. "You're going to marry him." The room spun. The walls closed in. Margaret's worst nightmare was about to become her reality.
The entire neighborhood gathered, not to celebrate a wedding, but to witness a spectacle, a joke, the humiliation of a girl who dared to show kindness. The announcement spread like wildfire. "Did you hear? Raymond's niece is marrying the beggar. That dirty man from the gate? You can't be serious. I heard she's been secretly meeting him. How desperate can you be?" The lies Raymond planted grew into a twisted narrative. Margaret, the orphan, the servant, was so pathetic, so undesirable, that only a beggar would have her. Vanessa posted it on social media with the photo she'd taken. Within hours, it was viral in their community. Mocking comments, laughing emojis, cruelty packaged as entertainment. Margaret locked herself in the servants' quarters, her world crumbling. She'd tried to refuse, begged Raymond to reconsider. "You can't force me," she'd said, her voice breaking. Raymond had leaned close, his breath hot and threatening. "Can't I? You have no money, no identification papers. I have those. No legal standing. You're nobody, Margaret. You'll do as I say, or I'll have you thrown in the streets with nothing." He wasn't bluffing. The wedding was scheduled for the following Saturday. No church, no white dress, no flowers or music. Just a quick civil ceremony in Raymond's study with a bribed official who asked no questions and cared even less. Margaret was given a plain gray dress, one of Diane's old discards. No makeup, no preparation. She looked like she was attending a funeral, her own. The beggar arrived exactly on time, escorted by Raymond like a prized pig to slaughter. He'd been forced to wash, but his clothes were still ragged, patched together from donated items. The neighborhood gathered outside the mansion gates, phones raised, recording, laughing. "This is better than reality TV. Look at her face, she's gonna cry. Imagine being so worthless you marry a beggar." Inside, the official droned through the ceremony with mechanical indifference. "Do you take this man?" Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. "I do." "Do you take this woman?" The beggar's response was firm, clear, and strangely confident. "I do." When the official pronounced them married, there was no kiss, no applause, just Raymond's satisfied smile and Diane's contemptuous sneer. "Get out," Raymond said flatly. "Both of you. This is no longer your home." Margaret gathered her few possessions, clothes, a photo of her parents, the small bracelet her mother once wore. As she walked toward the gate with her new husband, the crowd parted like she carried a disease. The mocking followed them down the street. Videos were already being shared, captioned with cruel jokes. Margaret felt numb, broken. Her life was over. But as they turned the corner, away from the jeering crowd, the beggar did something unexpected. He stopped walking. He turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw his eyes clearly, intelligent, calm, and burning with a quiet intensity that made her breath catch. "Margaret," his voice no longer rough, but smooth and educated, "I know you don't understand what just happened, but I need you to trust me." She stared at him, confused and terrified. She thought the worst was over. She thought marriage to a beggar was rock bottom, but what came next would either break her completely or reveal what she was truly made of. Margaret's confusion deepened when her new husband handed her an envelope. Inside was cash. Not much, but enough. "Rent us a place," he said simply, his voice back to that rough, uneducated tone. "Something small, somewhere we can live." Margaret wanted to ask questions,
demand answers, but exhaustion and shock had drained her completely. She found a small one-room apartment, cracked walls, flickering lights, a single mattress on the floor. It was all they could afford. Her husband nodded approvingly, then returned to his beggar routine, sitting outside their building, cup in hand, collecting coins from passers-by. Margaret stared in disbelief. Who is this man? Days turned into weeks, her husband, who still hadn't told her his real name, insisting she call him Daniel, maintained his disguise perfectly. He'd leave early each morning to beg at busy intersections. He'd return at night with a small amount of money, barely enough for rice and vegetables. Margaret, despite everything, took care of their tiny home. She cooked, she cleaned, she stretched every coin to make meals that were humble but nourishing. But Daniel tested her in ways she didn't expect. He'd come home and criticize her cooking. This is too salty. He'd leave his clothes filthy and expect her to wash them by hand. No machine, no complaints. He'd invite other beggars over, dirty, rough men who ate her food and left messes everywhere. Any other woman would have snapped, would have screamed, would have walked out. Margaret never did. One evening, Daniel brought home a sick homeless woman, feverish, delirious, smelling of the streets. She needs help, he said flatly. Margaret didn't hesitate. She gave up her side of the mattress, spent the night nursing the woman with cool cloths and gentle words, sitting on the floor herself. When the woman recovered and left 3 days later, Daniel watched Margaret with unreadable eyes. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Why what? Why do you stay? Why do you care for strangers? Why don't you hate me?" Margaret looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since the wedding. "Because hate takes more energy than I have," she said softly. "My parents taught me that everyone deserves dignity, everyone deserves kindness. Even when the world gives you nothing, you can still give something." She paused, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "You didn't choose this marriage either. We're both trapped, so why make each other miserable?" Something shifted in Daniel's expression, a crack in the mask he wore. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Not yet. The test wasn't over. But that night, after Margaret fell asleep on the thin mattress, Margaret slept, unaware that her life of suffering was about to transform in ways she couldn't possibly imagine.
While Margaret learned to survive on scraps, her uncle was drowning in luxury, spending money like water flowing through his fingers, never realizing the well was about to run dry. Back at the mansion, Raymond was living his best life, or so he thought. New cars filled the driveway, luxury vehicles he replaced every few months just because he could. Diane redecorated the house 3 times in 6 months, each time more extravagant than the last. Vanessa got a new wardrobe every season. Kyle received the latest gadgets before they even hit the stores. Raymond joined the most exclusive clubs, threw parties that made the society pages, and invested in businesses he knew nothing about, all on the advice of friends who saw him as an easy mark. "This is what we deserve," he'd say, pouring imported whiskey into crystal glasses. "My brother hoarded his wealth. I'm actually using it." The money that Margaret's father had spent decades building, earned through discipline, hard work, and careful planning, was being burned through at a staggering pace. But Raymond didn't notice. He was too intoxicated by his new status to see the warning signs. The first cracks appeared 6 months after Margaret's wedding. Raymond's accountant, a nervous man with perpetually sweaty palms, requested an urgent meeting. "Sir, we need to discuss your spending," he began carefully. "What about it?" Raymond waved dismissively. "You've gone through nearly 70% of the liquid assets. The investments you made, several have failed. The properties you purchased are depreciating, and your monthly expenses are— Are you telling me how to spend my own money?" Raymond's face reddened. The accountant swallowed hard. "Sir, at this rate, within a year, you'll— Get out." The accountant left. Raymond poured another drink. Diane noticed nothing. Vanessa and Kyle noticed nothing. They were too busy enjoying their elevated lifestyle. But the bills kept coming. The businesses kept failing. The friends kept asking for loans they'd never repay. And then came the final blow. A legal notice arrived, thick, official, terrifying. One of Raymond's major investments had collapsed. He was being sued. The amount they wanted exceeded everything he had left. For the first time since stealing the inheritance, Raymond felt genuine fear. He looked around the mansion, the renovations, the expensive furniture, the life he'd built on his brother's foundation. It was all slipping away. In desperation, Raymond made a decision that would seal his fate. He would sell the mansion. Not just any sale, a quick sale. He needed cash immediately to cover the lawsuit and his mounting debts. The real estate agent he contacted was sympathetic but realistic. The market's soft right now, and with a lawsuit public record, buyers will lowball you. "I don't care," Raymond said through clenched teeth. "Just sell it." Within weeks, the for sale sign went up outside the gates. The same gates where a beggar used to sit. The same gates Margaret had walked through as a bride of shame. The neighborhood buzzed with gossip. "Raymond selling? Didn't he just buy that place? I heard he's broke, spent everything. Karma's real, isn't it?" Vanessa was mortified. Kyle was angry. Diane blamed Raymond for everything. But the mansion sat on the market. Weeks passed. No serious offers came. Raymond's desperation grew into panic. Then, exactly 8 months after Margaret's wedding, the real estate agent called with unexpected news. "We have a buyer. Cash offer. Full asking price. They want to close immediately." Raymond nearly wept with relief. "Who is it?" "They want to remain anonymous. Some wealthy investor. Does it matter?" It didn't. Raymond signed everything without reading the fine print. What he didn't know was that the buyer had been watching, waiting, planning, and the mansion, his stolen kingdom, was about to become the stage for the most spectacular revelation this town had ever seen. Comment karma if you think Raymond deserves what's coming. Who bought the mansion?
The sale closed on a Wednesday. By Thursday morning, Raymond and his family were out, moved into a modest rental across town, their furniture crammed into rooms a fraction of the size they'd grown accustomed to. Diane cried. Vanessa refused to unpack. Kyle punched a wall. Raymond sat in stunned silence, staring at the bank statement that showed just enough money to survive, barely if they were careful. Everything he'd stolen was gone. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, something extraordinary was happening. Construction crews arrived at dawn, not local workers, but professional teams from the city. Architects, interior designers, landscapers with vision and unlimited budgets. The neighborhood watched with fascination as trucks rolled in daily, carrying materials that spoke of serious money. Imported marble, custom fixtures, exotic wood, smart home technology. High privacy fences went up first, blocking the view, but the sounds told the story. Saws, hammers, the hum of transformation. Who bought it became the neighborhood's obsession. Theories flew wildly. A tech billionaire, a celebrity, foreign royalty, someone with money to burn and taste to match. The renovation took 3 months. When the fences finally came down, the neighborhood gasped collectively. The mansion had been reborn. What was once impressive but aging was now breathtaking, a masterpiece of modern luxury blended with classical elegance. The exterior gleamed with fresh paint and architectural lighting. The gardens were sculpted perfection, with fountains and pathways that looked like art installations. Through the windows, when the curtains were open, people caught glimpses of crystal chandeliers, contemporary furniture, and technology that seemed from another world. But the house remained empty. No one moved in. "Maybe it's an investment property," someone suggested. "Or they're waiting for the right moment," another whispered. The mystery deepened the fascination. Raymond heard about it, of course. Everyone made sure he heard about it. Each description was a knife to his heart.
That was his house, his brother's house, and someone had turned it into something he could never have afforded, even at his peak. "Maybe we should drive by," Diane suggested one evening, "just to see." "No," Raymond said sharply, but his voice cracked. He couldn't bear to witness what he'd lost. What none of them knew, not Raymond, not the neighbors, not even the construction crews, was who was truly behind the transformation. In the modest apartment across town, Margaret continued her simple life, unaware that anything had changed. Daniel still left each morning in his beggar's disguise, still returned each evening with his small earnings. One evening, as Margaret prepared their simple dinner, Daniel watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Margaret, do you remember the date your parents died?" Her hands stilled. "Every day. My mother passed away 2 years ago next month, my father, exactly 1 year later. So their anniversary, the remembrance, is coming soon?" Margaret nodded, her eyes distant with grief. "Yes, in 2 weeks." Daniel stood and pulled her into an unexpected embrace, the first real affection he'd shown since their wedding. "Then that's when everything changes," he whispered against her hair. Margaret pulled back, confused and trembling. "Daniel, what's happening?" But he just smiled, a real smile, warm and full of promise, and said nothing more. Comment what you think is about to happen. Drop a plane if you're ready for the big reveal.
She woke up that morning thinking it would be another day of poverty and pain. She had no idea it would be the last day she'd ever live as the forgotten orphan named Margaret. 2 weeks passed in a blur of quiet normalcy. Margaret marked the days on a small calendar, each one bringing her closer to the anniversary of her parents' deaths. The grief was still raw, still real, even after all this time. She'd planned to visit their graves, light candles, say prayers. It was all she could afford, all she could offer. Daniel had been unusually attentive during those weeks, gentler, more present, stopped bringing chaos into their tiny apartment. "Are you feeling all right?" she asked one evening, noticing the change. "I'm feeling—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Like everything is finally falling into place." The morning of the anniversary arrived gray and cool. Margaret woke early, dressed in her simplest clothes, a plain dress she'd worn 100 times. She was preparing to leave for the cemetery when Daniel stopped her. "Wait," he said, "I have something for you." He handed her a box, plain, unmarked. Inside was a dress, not simple, not plain, beautiful. Elegant fabric in deep blue, the kind of dress she hadn't worn since before her parents died. "Daniel, we can't afford—" "Today is special," he interrupted. "Humor me, wear it." Margaret changed, bewildered but touched by the gesture. When she emerged, Daniel was also transformed. Gone were the beggar's rags. He wore a clean, well-fitted suit, nothing extravagant, but respectable. His face was freshly shaved, his hair was trimmed. He looked different, more like the man she'd glimpsed in brief moments over the past year. "Who are you?" she whispered, the question she'd been holding back finally breaking free. "You'll know everything soon," he promised, "but first we need to go." "To the cemetery?" "Not yet. There's somewhere else first. Trust me." The same luxury car from their wedding day pulled up outside their apartment building. Margaret's heart hammered in her chest. They drove in silence through streets that became increasingly familiar, heading toward her old neighborhood, toward the mansion. "Daniel, why are we—" "Patience," he said softly, taking her hand. When they turned onto her old street, Margaret gasped. Cars lined both sides, expensive vehicles, media vans, cameras on tripods. The neighborhood was alive with activity, all centered around one location, the mansion. But it wasn't the mansion she remembered. It was transformed, magnificent, glowing in the morning light like something from a dream. A crowd had gathered outside the gates. Police were managing the perimeter. Someone had set up a red carpet leading to the entrance. "What is all this?"
Margaret breathed. The car didn't stop at the crowd. It drove straight through, security parting to let them pass, heading directly toward the mansion's main entrance. As they pulled up, Margaret saw a banner stretched across the entrance, "In loving memory of Thomas and Helena, together forever." Her parents' names. Her breath caught. Tears sprang to her eyes. "Daniel, how did you—" The car door opened. Daniel stepped out first, then offered her hand. As Margaret emerged, the crowd erupted, not in mockery this time, but in gasps of shock and confusion. Is that Margaret? The girl who married the beggar? What is she doing here? Standing at the entrance was Raymond, forced to attend by the mysterious new owner's legal team, part of the sale contract's strange requirements. His face was pale, his eyes hollow from months of financial ruin. When he saw Margaret, his expression shifted from confusion to recognition to something like fear. Daniel leaned close to Margaret and whispered, "Are you ready to reclaim everything they stole from you?" Before she could answer, the sound of rotors filled the air. Everyone looked up. A helicopter was approaching, sleek, black, expensive. No, not a helicopter. A private jet was landing in the mansion's expansive back garden, a garden large enough apparently for such an arrival. The crowd went silent. Phones were raised. The world held its breath. And Margaret, poor, forgotten, humiliated Margaret, felt Daniel's hand squeeze hers as he whispered, "Welcome home, Mrs. Chen."
For 1 year, he'd lived as a beggar, eaten scraps, slept on floors, all to answer one question. In a world of greed and cruelty, could true goodness still exist? The private jet's door opened. Out stepped a man in an impeccable suit, silver-haired, dignified, carrying himself with unmistakable authority. Behind him, a team of assistants in what appeared to be legal advisors. The man surveyed the crowd, then his eyes landed on Daniel. He bowed, actually bowed, with deep respect. "Mr. Chen," the man said formally, "everything is prepared as you requested." The crowd's murmur turned into shocked whispers. Chen, as in Chen International? The billionaire Chen family? That's impossible. The beggar is... Daniel, who was clearly not just Daniel, turned to face the crowd. His entire demeanor had shifted. The hunched shoulders were gone. The uncertain movements vanished. He stood tall, commanding, every inch the powerful man he'd been hiding. "My name," he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly across the stunned crowd, "is Daniel Chen, CEO of Chen International Holdings." Margaret's knees nearly buckled. Daniel, her beggar husband, caught her gently. "I know you have questions," he said softly to her, his eyes full of warmth. "Let me answer them." Daniel addressed the crowd, but his words were meant for Margaret. "1 year ago, I made a decision. I'd built an empire, accumulated wealth most people couldn't imagine, but I'd also seen the worst of humanity. People who smiled to my face while plotting to steal from me. Partners who betrayed me. Friends who only wanted my money." His voice hardened. "I became cynical. I stopped believing that genuine goodness existed, that anyone could love without wanting something in return." He looked at Raymond, whose face had turned as ashen. "So I created a test. I disguised myself as the lowest member of society, a beggar. Someone with nothing to offer, someone people would ignore, mock, or abuse. I wanted to see if anyone would show me kindness without expecting reward." The crowd was utterly silent. "I sat outside this mansion for months. Hundreds of people passed me. Do you know how many stopped to help? How many acknowledged I was human?" He paused. "One. Only one." Daniel turned to Margaret, his expression softening completely. "She brought me food from her own meager portions. She spoke to me with dignity. She defended my humanity when others mocked me. And when her cruel uncle forced me to marry her, as punishment, as humiliation,
She never once complained. Margaret was crying now, overwhelmed. For 1 year, I tested her. I stayed in character. I brought chaos into her life. I gave her every reason to abandon me, to show her true colors, to reveal selfishness or greed. His voice broke slightly. She never did. She cared for strangers. She nursed sick homeless people in our tiny apartment. She stretched every coin to feed not just us, but anyone who needed help. She remained kind when the world gave her every reason to be cruel. Daniel took Margaret's hands in his. This mansion, your father's mansion, I bought it, anonymously. I restored it to honor your parents' memory. Every room, every detail was designed thinking about what they would have wanted for you. He gestured to the jet. That's ours. The company is ours. Everything I have is yours, Margaret, not because of a marriage contract, but because you showed me that goodness still exists in this world. The crowd erupted, some in applause, others in shock, many in tears. But Margaret only had eyes for her husband, this man who'd hidden an empire to find truth. The documents Raymond used to steal your inheritance, Daniel continued, his voice turning steel. Our legal team examined them months ago. They're forgeries, poorly done ones. Raymond tried to run. Security blocked his path. We have evidence, witnesses, everything needed to prosecute. Your father's true will was found in the National Registry. It left everything to Margaret. Daniel's eyes locked onto Raymond with cold fury. You stole from an orphan. You abused her. You tried to destroy her spirit through humiliation and cruelty. And you spent money that was never yours. He turned to his legal team. File all charges. I want justice. Complete justice. Raymond collapsed to his knees, Diane screaming beside him, Vanessa and Kyle crying in humiliation as cameras captured every moment. But Daniel wasn't finished. He had one more surprise, one that would make this day truly unforgettable. Daniel guided Margaret toward the mansion's entrance, the crowd parting like water. Inside, the transformation was even more breathtaking. Every detail spoke of love and remembrance. Photos of her parents restored and beautifully framed, her mother's favorite flowers in crystal vases, her father's study recreated exactly as Margaret remembered it. This is your home, Daniel said gently. It always was. I just brought it back to you. Margaret walked through rooms filled with memories, touching walls she'd scrubbed as a servant, now restored to their former glory. Tears streamed freely down her face, not from sadness, but from overwhelming relief. In the main living room, Daniel's legal team had set up a presentation. There's something you need to see, Daniel said, gesturing to a screen. The video began to play. Security footage, financial records, testimonies, Raymond's entire scheme laid bare. The forged signatures, the bribed officials, the systematic theft of her father's fortune. Every transaction tracked, every lie documented. This will be submitted to authorities within the hour, the lead attorney explained. Mr. Raymond faces multiple charges: fraud, forgery, embezzlement, abuse. He's looking at 15 to 20 years in prison. Outside, police were already taking Raymond into custody. His protests were pathetic, his excuses transparent. Diane shrieked about their reputation. Vanessa and Kyle stood frozen, their entitled world crumbling in real time. The same neighbors who'd laughed at Margaret's wedding now watched Raymond's arrest with a mix of shock and savage satisfaction. Karma's real, someone whispered. She warned him, another said. Kindness always comes back. The media was having a field day. The story had everything: hidden billionaire, year-long test, exposed fraud, dramatic revelation. Headlines were already writing themselves. Billionaire disguised as beggar finds true love. Orphaned heiress reclaims stolen fortune. The marriage that changed everything. But Margaret wasn't thinking about headlines or revenge or even justice. She was thinking about the little girl at the shelter who'd asked why she still smiled despite her problems. Because kindness doesn't cost anything, she'd said then. Now she understood the full truth. Kindness doesn't cost anything, but it's worth everything. Daniel led Margaret to the mansion's balcony overlooking the garden where the Jets still sat, a gleaming symbol of their new life. "I have one more question," he said, his voice suddenly vulnerable. "This past year, the marriage was forced. You never had a choice. Now you know everything. You have your inheritance, your home, your freedom." He took a deep breath. "Margaret, will you stay married to me? Not because you have to, not because I'm wealthy, but because you want to, because we built something real in that tiny apartment?" Margaret looked at this man, this billionaire who'd lived as a beggar, who'd tested her without her knowing, who'd given her back everything she'd lost. "You spent a year looking for goodness in the world," she said softly. "I spent a year learning that wealth isn't money, it's character, it's integrity, it's choosing kindness when cruelty would be easier." She took his hands. "You don't need my money, Daniel. I never did, but I'd like to keep my husband, if he promises to never test me again." Daniel laughed, a genuine, joyous sound. "Never again, I promise." They kissed as the crowd below erupted in applause, as cameras flashed, as the neighborhood that had mocked her now celebrated her triumph. 6 months later, the mansion wasn't just a home, it was a foundation headquarters, the Margaret Chen Foundation for Orphaned Children, funded by both her inheritance and Daniel's wealth, provided education, housing, and hope to thousands of children. Raymond was serving his sentence. Diane had filed for divorce. Vanessa and Kyle were learning, slowly, what it meant to earn rather than steal. And Margaret, she still visited the children's shelter every Sunday, still told stories, still gave hope. But now she arrived not in borrowed clothes, but as herself, a woman who'd survived the worst and chose to give her best. Daniel often joined her, no longer disguised, no longer testing, just a man who'd found what he was looking for. Proof that in a world of cruelty and greed, true goodness still exists. And sometimes, if you're patient enough, if you're kind enough, goodness wins. Always. Comment your country and tag someone who needs to hear this story. If you believe kindness always wins, drop a heart below. Subscribe for more incredible true life stories that will restore your faith in humanity.
Margaret's story proves something powerful. Your current situation is not your final destination. She married a beggar and found a billionaire. She lost everything and gained even more. But here's the real lesson. Her transformation didn't come from luck or magic. It came from staying kind when the world was cruel, staying dignified when everyone mocked her, and staying faithful when she had every reason to give up. If this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button right now. Share this with someone who needs hope today. Drop your country flag below and tell us, have you ever been underestimated? Because your comeback might be closer than you think. Your jet is coming. Keep believing, keep being kind. See you in the next story.